Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning. If I haven't met you before, my name's Greg Wright. I'm a guy lucky enough to be the North House director. And welcome to the 2022 Wooden Boat Show. If you can believe this, 25 years. Wow. So this is the featured speakers of 2022 Wooden Boat Show. And that said, I want to just begin with a couple quick updates so everybody feels like they are on board with how the adventure will work. First, as I think you all know, how do events like this happen? The power of community. I mean, it's been incredible watching the traditions that got put in place in that first year with the Wooden Boat Show. I mean, the chowder feed, still here, going strong, raised over $4,000 yesterday for empty bowls. Wow. I mean, that's community at work, right? Last night's solstice pageant, the Good Harbor Hill Players, Gamma Pelage. I mean, if that wasn't like magic this world needs desperately, wow, so cool. And for North House to have them as partners, so important. Second thing, so community powers events like this, volunteers do as well as guests like the Duluth Boat Builder Superheroes, folks who helped at the info table, folks who served endless bowls of chowder. I think 12 different restaurants brought in chowder, which means we served roughly 60 gallons of chowder to over 300 people. I'm just doing the math, just think a little bit about it. And so it's really cool. The other thing I want to say is events like this happen because of an incredible staff team. I don't know if you all know who is on the staff team, but we've been really lucky to recruit several new folks. If the staff team could stand up, I would like you to be recognized for all the hard work that makes North House real. So, and the speakers are going to talk, and they're going to tell some stories, and I don't think we're going to do any fact checking. We're just going to let the facts lay as they will. I do want to confirm that the journey will continue. There is going to be cake, just in case you were wondering, which means we are going to get to sing Happy Birthday. And if you like cake, I want to remind you, this is not our only celebration of the year. Basket Week, Family Week's all out there, but so is Unplugged. This year, the fourth weekend of September, am I right? Fourth weekend of September, 3 nights, 2 nights of music, and a culminating flannel formal on Saturday night, as well as the Winners Gathering Arctic Film Festival will happen, and there will be a big exhibit aligned with that event as well. So lots of reasons to celebrate. Now, we're, of course, really honored to have these guys here. And that said, we're also really honored to have many folks who were part of the earliest days of the folk school. And this is another important group to recognize. There's 2 questions I'm asked the most. The first question is, where did North House come from? And then the second question is, who made it happen? So if you were part of those earliest days, I'd like you to stand up and be recognized as well. Some of you might have Birch Bark Stars. Come on, ready? Stand up. You have to stand up. And then we're going to cheer. Woo! This place is a miracle. And you guys breathed life into this miracle. So, we're eternally indebted. So, it's a real honor to introduce Tom and Mark and Tim, the founding co-directors of the school. I like to say that I'm the first person who was ever paid to work full-time for the school. I know these guys worked way more than full-time in those earliest years. And then Tim, a founding board member who jumped in and said, Sure, I'm in. What do you need me to do? And I don't know if they had a complete list at that time, but Tim leaned in anyway. And what's really cool is how the stories about the creation of the school still speak to the world. I love to tell a story, for instance, about the first Greenlandic class. Technically not a North House class, because the words North House Folk School weren't even real yet. People go, what? They started a school before they had a name? And yeah, they did. Or the first catalog being published before there was a classroom. Right? Right? Do I have that fact mostly correct? And people go, really? That's how you start a folk school? And apparently the question and answer is, yeah, it is. And because, I don't know if everybody knows this, but when the North House started, we were the 4th folk school in the United States. Today, over 80 folk schools in the United States, most of whom, if you ask, what's her name? Dawn with the Folk School Alliance. Why? The answer is their primary inspiration is North House Folk School. So North House has not only touched lives, but it's touched the world. And here's that 25-year journey and to the next 25 years ahead. So without further ado, our featured speakers.
All right. Okay, can you all hear me? Okay. So what we're going to do here just a little bit is I'm going to start with a few questions for Mark and Tom. But at the end of this is we're going to invite people to come up who have their stories that they would like to share. So if you have something that you would like to say, some revealing story, please think about coming on up, and you too can get on the video along with everybody else. So, and then we'll adjourn for cake. So, so that's kind of the way this will get started. So, and Greg's already really sort of brought up the first question, and that is, where did the idea come from? Where did you bump into it? Where were you in your life when you first started thinking folk school? Maybe not North House Folk School, but
well, my son was going off to college, and being a caregiver, I had time because Dan was leaving the household, and so I had time, and I had people that wanted to apprentice with me in the little boat building shop I had east of town, and I thought, well, I think I'll give a shot at teaching here. And I called the Coast Guard, and they let me use the Coast Guard boathouse. Wonderful, wonderful place to work, and had the idea that I needed to have kind of grounded in some kind of philosophy. I taught it through community ed, and did some research, and spent some time studying a Lutheran bishop by the name of Grundtvig, who was kind of responsible for starting the folk traditions of Denmark. And he's kind of a curious fellow. He was a Lutheran pastor, and his very first sermon that he preached in Copenhagen was, "Why isn't God in the house of God?" And he was very concerned about people the have-nots in that society. And so, oh, geez, we've got a progressive here. You know, back in the early 1800s, he's doing some pretty interesting work. And so I used the folk school idea, those traditions of Denmark, because they really spoke to me, and I've always been a fan of Denmark because that's where Knud Rasmussen and Peter Freuchen came from, and they were my heroes from a long time ago. So anyway, I taught the class out there, and it was just amazing. I used the idea that education is a loving process. You have to be generous to teach. You have to be open to stories. It's important for anyone who's teaching in a folk school to have at least 24 stories that reveal yourself to the students. And this is a way to welcome people, to bring people into the classroom and to appreciate them. The school should be about diversity. It should be about cooperation. Leave competition at the door. And it was a lot of fun. We had 12 students the first year. We were building Inuit kayaks out there, and we did it in the month of April. And it was a smashing success. It was a lot of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I think the other folks in the class did as well. One thing I discovered in researching folk schools in Denmark is that it's a homogeneous society. You know, everyone's got blonde hair or pretty close to blonde hair, but in America, when the folk tradition started in America, a lot of these Danes came to America, and they, well, what do we do in a heterogeneous society where we don't have the same ideas, the same cultures, and so the folk school founders here in America, like Highland and John Campbell and the Clearing, they said that if you don't have that homogeneity, what you need to do is you need to go into the community and find out what the needs are. Bring people in and try to meet their needs. And I just thought, that's amazing. That's perfect. You know, I come from a social service background. And I was 25 years working in a small social service agency, and you know, it was great to be able to come up with this idea to try to meet the needs of people here in the community. So that's kind of a rough on how it happened. And then these buildings became available, and lucky facilities, and then is there anything I'm missing on this, Tom?
Well, there's a lot of I think questions that we were able to read the questions beforehand just a few minutes ago. So we'll wait for some of those to happen. But yeah, that's covers it quite.
Tom, tell us where you bumped into the idea. How did you
From an educational standpoint, I had the privilege back in the '80s of working with my brother to develop a program at a youth camp near Longville, where we had kids building, at first, a log cabin with hand tools, and then secondarily, we were like, oh, that timber framing looks pretty cool. So we developed that. We built a big timber frame building with a bunch of 15-year-old kids, all with hand tools and so forth. And we had kids, you know, putting lines from draft horses into a 15-year-old's hand and having them pull a stick of red pine out of the woods is a pretty transformative experience for them. And so from a philosophical standpoint, that's kind of how I ended up, philosophical and educational standpoint, you know, really grasping onto how transformative experiences like that can be. And then, of course, how I bumped into this character.
Yeah,
and so
why don't you
forth.
explain that?
Sure. I had just recently quit my job running that youth camp. I was not just helped develop that program, but was administratively involved with the fundraising, long-term stuff. And I had moved to the town of Finland, Minnesota. I'd quit that job, bought a piece of property to start a timber framing shop, and I was living with a character by the name of Charlie Mayo in a house in Finland, Minnesota. And Mark had been running around northern Minnesota assembling. Just been at a meeting, and he came home from that meeting and was like, Tom, I think you really need to meet Mark. And a couple days later, we were having breakfast in the East Bay Hotel, and we were visiting about this idea, which I just thought was wonderful and great. And Mark asks me, well, what time can I call you? I said, well, you can call me any time of day. That's fine. It doesn't matter. And so the very next morning, the phone rings at 4 o'clock in the morning. Who in the world's calling me at 4 o'clock in the morning? Hi, Tom, it's Mark. And before I knew it, I was moving to Grand Marais, and yeah, we were off and running.
So Charlie was the matchmaker.
Yep, Charlie was the matchmaker there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I had known Charlie for quite a few years. He and my dad were friends, and well, Charlie's fun. You know, he's a great time, and so anybody who's a friend of Charlie's is a friend of mine, and so he came along just in time. You know, it's so important to be around people that know how to laugh, right? Yeah, so no, it worked out good. We hit it off right away. I think we were both on the same page right to begin with. Tom's not afraid of work, and we just it was a time of great creativity. I was just always amazed at what you can accomplish without any money at all. And it took a lot of time. I left my job at social services so I could do this full time. And the other thing that's so important here is that Wendy, why don't you stand up? Stand up, Wendy. Wendy was the bread earner. North House took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort. It was even. We didn't have to pull money out of my own pocket once in a while, but at least there was no money in it, right? And so Wendy was holding down the fort at home, and it actually started Wendy and I at the kitchen table, and I go, well, I'm doing this class out there, and Wendy was weighing it because she's an educator, a graduate level student of education, and so thank you, Wendy. And I should also mention that Wendy came up with the name of the school.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you. So anyway, where were we again? What was it?
Oh, yeah. You've just blown through my questions.
I'll just chime in real quick because Mark brought up laughter, and I just used it a few minutes ago before this started. Was people would show up on campus and ask, "Where's Mark?" And it would just be, well, just wait a minute and listen for the belly laugh. And sure enough, we'd find Mark pretty quickly that way. And I just did that with Joe before we started this.
Well, if we're going to talk about laughing and vocalization, the cops came down here one time, and they pulled up and they said, "Well, where's the fight?" And I said, "Well, there's no fight down here." And they said, "Yeah, there's been some hollering around here." And it was actually Tom on, I don't know how many cups of coffee he had that morning, but Tom can yell out to the break wall, and people will go, "Who's that?"
I prefer the word project.
Project. There you go.
Yeah, and I think I'll just put this in. I think it was Voltaire who originally said, I think, that history is a collection of lies agreed upon. So you folks better be in trouble maybe this morning.
There's a whole line of stories just on Mark recruiting people, and I'm looking out here and I see a whole bunch of folks, and almost everybody has a story that I don't think it starts at 4 o'clock in the morning, but something like that. But all right, well, I'm going to ask you guys. Mark, you just kind of went into it, but no money, lots of energy, kind of happy chaos everywhere. There's a lot of risk going on. There's reputational or financial. Talk about what you guys, between the two of you or with Wendy or whoever, how were you handling? There's a lot of things happening here, and there was no, we're sitting here 25 years after, and it's an obvious success, but at the time, nobody knew we were going to be here 25 years from now.
Well,
so
yeah,
how did you deal with that?
Well, we played it pretty loose. It was like, well, if this doesn't work out, we can always say we're sorry and we should have known better. and so, with that guiding principle, that guiding thought, you just, go into it. So, isn't that kind of how it went? I mean, you were living in the blue building.
It was a white building at the time, yeah.
A white building.
We called it the West Building.
And I think there was a microwave in there, and a typewriter, and a kind
coffee
of a
maker.
greasy little down sleeping bag.
Yeah.
And nobody had any money, and
or
so,
much reverence for it.
yeah, it's just amazing what you can accomplish without any money. I just can't say enough about that. Well, what did we do? We begged, and I always my dad always said that when you ask for something other than for yourself, to help people, to help whatever, you're standing on holy ground. And so, and the other thing about asking is that you're respecting someone when you ask. You're saying, I respect you, you have resources, you have the ability, and I'm coming to you because I think you can help us. And that shows respect. And I think that's the frame of mind you have to be in when you're running around begging for money. And so it worked. You know, it somehow we made it. I guess our big breakthrough in money came from Grand Portage. I went up and visited with Norman and Gilbert and Fatty Shear and some of the folks that were on the tribal council, and brought up lots of stuff that we had made, and I had taught classes up at Grand Portage before, and had just a really delightful experience teaching up there. I hit it off right away with Walter Caribou when I moved to the county, and Walter was just this great guy who built canoes and paddles, and he was very welcoming, a lot of fun to be around. His wife Alma, and so they knew me up there, and so I would, you know, Tom Husfit, who was the director of social service at the time, passed away last year. Wonderful guy. When I took the county job, he says, I want you to go up to Portage a couple times a week and help out where you can. And so, you know, there was people struggling, and they wanted me to facilitate a group. And I said, well, how about if we just make snowshoes and some paddles and whatnot, and then we'll just visit around that. And boy, did that work out well. It was well received. You know, Walter was there. You've got an elder there that's working with people, and it was a time when people can forget about, you know, all of the bad stories that they've accumulated in their head about themselves and move into something else, start a new chapter of their life. And so I go up to Grand Portage thinking we need some money, you know, because we agreed to pay $400 a month rent here, and, you know, money's going out like crazy. And so I sat down with the tribal council there, and I said, well, I'm here begging, and showed him, talked about what we were doing, and of course, Gilbert, he knew me pretty well, and I knew Norman pretty well from all that, and so, you know, it wasn't 5 minutes into the conversation, Norman says, how much money do you need? And it's like, $10,000, I said. And who was it? Irene. She was the bookkeeper. And he said, Irene, cut him a check for $10,000. Wow. Geez, I could have run around the table and kissed them all, you know. It's like, whoa, big deal. So my hat goes off to Grand Portage. The people there, they saved us. They saved us that first winter. And of course, we agreed to do 6 months here, and if it didn't work out, you know, we're sorry, and let somebody else move in. So that propelled us. That paid the light bills. That paid a lot of different things. And so anyway, that was.
Yeah,
Did that answer that question?
yeah, it did, and it made me think of other stories. Walter Caribou, for those of you who didn't meet him, had the unique experience of killing a moose with a screwdriver, which he would tell you a story about that often as the moose was swimming across the lake, and that was the only thing he had, and so he ended up procuring a moose with a screwdriver. But those were different days then.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And Dennis Risdall was also instrumental financially early on, right?
He was.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Dennis, he was great. I mean,
Resourceful in numerous ways, aside from, you know, just in terms of strategic planning, he was a great resource, not just financially, but also
Would one of
from
you
a
tell
planning
the
standpoint.
story of the fundraising down at Dennis's place with an event happened on the newly installed carpet?
Oh, you mean the very first meeting that we
Yeah,
had? Yeah. It was. I called a number of people together that were in the craft community in Healy and on the South Shore, and a fellow from Canada, and blocking her name from Healy, Millie
Bissonnet.
Millie Bissonnet, and Charlie was there, and Tom Scheib, and Scheib had Little Lamb at that meeting, and I found a picture of that the other day, and this little lamb was running around. It was about that big, and it was bottle fed, and it was pooping and peeing all over the place, and it was great. It was just like, wow, here it is, and you just swoop that thing up, a little lamb, they're irresistible, and so, yeah, we had a good meeting, and that was sort of the introductory. That was like, okay, so here's the idea, folks. I want to know what you think, and everything went, yeah, good idea, do it. And then I remember what Millie said. Millie came up to me, and she says, "This is a really good idea, Mark. But you should create this school so it's like you have to walk through a half a mile of tag alder to get to it. And in other words, keep it small." Well, the paradox is you try to keep something this small, it wants to grow. People want in, and so when she said that, I just thought, oh, this is good. This will work. Is that the story?
Yeah. That's one of them, yeah. You sort of anticipated this, Mark, but is it in the back of either one of your minds where you're looking to kind of create a certain kind of atmosphere that we all enjoy now? Or in the middle of this, you go, wait a minute, we need to make a course adjustment in how things were going? Or from the get-go, were you feeling pretty good about where it was marching?
I would say one thing from the very beginning is that we've always said and always professed that this place needs to be important to this community, and you can justify that in so many different ways. And like if you read the original IRRB grants, et cetera, it was all about providing so many jobs and economic development, and being a potentially great economic engine for the city of Grand Marais. And several of you were probably around Grand Marais 25 years ago, and it's a little bit different community now, and from a lot of different perspectives, not just North House, but being that's been the one driving force the whole time, and it's beyond just being important in terms of economic development and providing jobs and so forth, but being an important place for the people who live and work here on a regular basis to be able to show up and call this, their asset. So I think that's been maybe a driving force that was there from the beginning.
Yeah, and just for the people that live here, coming from the social service perspective, I mean, if you're going to ask someone to, stop drinking, what do you replace that with? As someone who's got, depression. The Danes always says the best thing for depression is to learn something, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. And so it provided options for the average person. And Greg and the crew have done a really good job of making sure that people that don't have the resources can take classes. And I think that's just great. So many of the things that have carried on from our early days are impressive. Yeah.
Which is a great segue into the next question, so thank you. What do you guys think are kind of the significant milestones looking back? I mean, there's the first meetings. I'm thinking like I was around when the Yortis got purchased and we had no money, which was an interesting thing to buy when you don't have any money. But and there was a few events like that. But what are the milestones that you guys? What were some of the significant things that you knew things were going good?
From a programming standpoint, Mark mentioned the Grand Portage money, and there's which there was also Northland Foundation, and then what Wendy had put together the Minnesota Humanities Foundation for some annual funding. But from a capital standpoint, one of the biggest hallmarks, I guess, was when we got the grant from the IRRB to renovate the red building on behalf of the city of Grand Marais, so it could function as a shop space for a folk school. And I recall when there's a pre-application process before you got the formal application. In the pre-application process, we were notified that we had passed and that they were going to come do a site visit on whatever, July 12th or something. And we look on the calendar, and there's nothing going on the day of the site visit, which we had about 2 weeks to prepare for. And we'd been looking at different potential coursework, and like the week before, we'd been looking at, we're kind of scheming what the coursework might be in the fall, and we'd seen this called the 6-hour plywood canoe. And we're like, well, if we get a bunch of Luan plywood from up at Sawtooth Lumber and get a bunch of kids from the community and their families to come down here, and there's probably some plywood canoe builders in this crowd, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I'm getting some waves from out there. And we just said, come as a family, build a canoe, a couple of kids, one kid, whatever, and one adult supervisor, whether it's a parent or somebody else, and pay us whatever you can. And we got everything from $25 to $400 from the and when the IRRRB showed up for their pre-site visit, that building was just 5 garage doors and a plain white building, and we had multiple families in there and banging on plywood canoes, and they were pretty impressed with what was going on, and we got the grant in September of '97. We were renovating that building for the specific intent of running it as a shop.
Nice.
We raised that money for the city of Grand Marais. It was a pretty cool deal.
I think the other one was buying Tommy's property next door.
Absolutely.
That was big. And that was sort of the anchor, because this is city property. That piece of property, which we acquired, with the help of Dennis and the board. You remember that?
I do.
And
yeah.
that was a little scary. It's always like, well, if something happens with a yardist, how responsible are we as board members?
I was worried about my college, my kids' college fund at that point. Yeah.
But what it said to the community, we're serious about this. We're going full tilt on this, and so I think there was a lot of support in the community once we did that. Oh.
And another, shortly after that, we received funding. We purchased that property, the Eckel property, and then, and we still had no sewer down here. The yellow house was on city sewer, but there was nothing down here. It was still
just a holding tank.
A holding tank, and that building was started with a secondary IRRRB grant, but then NOAA, as in the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, I believe, had a coastal program grant available. And again, because we had this symbiotic relationship with the city of Grand Marais, we were able to raise several $100,000, both for programming on the Ordis and for completing that building and tying the whole works into the city utilities and so forth. So,
And that's a part of this a lot of us didn't see, was the behind-the-scene paperwork and grant application. I remember hearing you muttering about it, but even the filing, I had to ask Tom, what was sort of the start of North House, and you mentioned in an email about the nonprofit in February of '97, where you actually did the 501(c)(3).
yeah, we filed with the state right away, founded the school, did the corporate nonprofit paperwork with the state of Minnesota, and then shortly thereafter filed the 501(c)(3) application with the IRS, and it was a lengthy application, multiple interviews and so forth on the phone with the IRS and so forth. And they never did a site visit, but Mark's got a story here.
and the IRS agent became a member in North House.
Yes, he did.
I wonder how often that happens. Okay, this should be a good test here. Tell us events that, at least things that happened down here, that momentarily left you speechless. I can't imagine it lasted very long, but...
We're still waiting for that to happen, Mark.
Or came close to leaving you speechless.
Got one?
I'll have to think on that one.
Well, I did. I had a lot of vets that were dealing with PTSD, and they were getting as long as they went to their support groups, they could get money to build their boats and skis and whatever they were here to build. And every so often, you'd have a 9mm pistol that you see in someone's pants in the back. And it's always like, oh, there's a gun in the class. And so it was always kind of tricky, you know, dealing with the gun thing. And I had 3 or 4 episodes like that, and that's about as wild as it got for me. And you know, you got to kind of pull them to the side and say, geez, nice gun, you know. I wonder if that couldn't be better put in the truck, you know. And it's just amazing the response you got. It was never really a big issue. But yeah, can you think of any other ones?
For some reason, I was reminded of the time when we were about to erect the blacksmith shop right about in this location, because this was where the flammables building for the Forest Service was. Because the blacksmith shop was originally erected here, then moved over there, and then added on to. But I remember we were putting the sill down because we had the class coming and we were going to put the frame up. And I had a hammer drill. You remember this? And it started smoking. And it quit as I was trying to put all this sill work down on the slab. And I took that drill and I grabbed it by the plug and I did a big hammer throw, and the drill made it almost to the leg. And Mark started laughing, and I started laughing. And
we got a winner!
I don't think we said anything. We were speechless.
Or Chuck Soderholm's grandson was in Harley Refsal's class, flat plane carving, and he really cut himself deep. And this little Andy, where's Chuck? Chuck's in the audience somewhere. So little Andy goes over to Harley and says, well, and he's got blood dripping off his elbow now. I mean, it's really coming out. And he's just calmly says, well, it looks like I cut myself. And then Norma, Harley's wife, says, oh my gosh, she's a nurse, right? So it flew into action. It's like, boy, I've never seen anyone bleed like that in a class before. And of course, you'll get that.
First
of several bleeding student stories.
Maybe not a speechless moment, but they're showing pictures of the reindeer. Tom, tell us about that, what that was all about.
Oh, well, that was the first, we had the Seed of Stalin, which was the North American Sami gathering here, I believe, in conjunction with the very first Winterfest. And that was a hoot, and Tom Schei brought up a few reindeer, and we were promoting these reindeer races, which if folks go back far enough and remember the game of electric football where you'd put the players on the thing and you flip the switch and they just vibrate all over the place. Well, we went onto the baseball diamond over here and closed all the fences off, and Peter Henriksen and I got behind a couple of harnessed up reindeer,
and you're on skis.
And we were on skis, and we skied around the baseball diamond behind reindeer. And there was no, I mean, they just ran around. There was no, So
like,
in spirit with the, non-competitive school, it was pretty non-competitive because those reindeer.
It was like getting pulled by a big chicken.
There was no Kentucky Derby going on there. So.
It's beautiful.
And we also had the whip sled down here, the Vippokalaki.
Yeah. And we almost killed both Charlie Mayo and one of the Bjork kids with that thing. So,
that was a dangerous rig.
Yeah, but it was fun.
But it was fun.
Yeah. But speaking of the Bjork kids, I just want to point out that we had very first year we were, I forget, I think Lila Nelson was teaching a weaving class in the south end of the now red building, then east building, and this guy sticks his head in when his kids are out here, and he's like, oh, what do you guys got going on here? And kind of explain the school to them and explain, timber framing background and so forth, and then, it's cool. And the next day he shows up and says, well, when you guys are ready to do that timber framing class, let me know what you need. I'll supply all the timbers. I'm a timber framer down in Cambridge. And so when we built the blacksmith shop, we just called him up and sure enough told him what we wanted, and boom, Phil Bjork, Great Northern Woodworks made one of the first capital development projects, just happen. It was great. Yeah. So, a lot of unsung folks like that who just make stuff happen.
Yeah, they were all over the place, and a lot of them are sitting out here right now.
Yeah.
So, and you just actually bumped into my next question, which is how do you explain you're in Montana? How do you explain North House to people? How do you give them a sense of what it's all about?
Oh, it's pretty easy because you know, in this day and age, people really connect with wanting to do these things. I think, you know, and that's, and it has a, you know, a lot of people didn't quite understand it at first, but I think a lot of folks did. We're kind of searching to get busy and do stuff as we were transforming into this, I mean, obviously COVID put us in a more work at home deal, but a lot more, society was transforming at that time. And the more, it's really the beginning of the worldwide Google Tubes was the same time that we started North House. And so there was an actual fortunate synergy there, because that was the tool that a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people would go and search for what they're interested in. That we used to spend a lot of time living, doing these things like weaving stuff and tanning hides and building timber frames and blacksmithing, but we did it and gardening and music and all that stuff. We did it because we lived, and now it's, in some respects, we've withdrawn from some of that, and but we gravitate, as a function of living, but we gravitate towards it now as a function of it's necessary in a different way. And so I think it's pretty easy for people to get their head around, wow, in school where I can go build a timber frame or build a boat or bang on hot iron or make a shoe, I mean, it resonates pretty quickly with folks.
Yeah, the things of life, the things that we need, I think coincides with the name, the image, which is a Sami image of home. I mean, so there's a lot of different things that people can get involved in, and it may be a husband who wants to do this and a wife who wants to do that, and so it's it just seemed like people were hungry for that. I mean, we're still wired up like our ancestors were to make the things that we need, and there's a lot of people that come here that realize, well, I'm not going to be the president of the company. How do I find success in my life? And people, like the ski class especially, I mean, people would come make a pair of skis, and they're like on a mission from God, to make these skis, and it's just like, boy, oh boy, really into it, and that's fun to see. Yeah, it's what they say in Denmark is that education is not something that you pour into somebody; it's things that you draw out of people. And I think that's good stuff. That's important. And so it is a loving process. You really need to. I mean, if you had two fiddle makers, one that was the greatest fiddle maker in the world and someone who was not bad, if the one who was not bad had a personality and knew how to extend themselves, that's the one you want to teach. And so it's about these human relationships and honoring them. And I think, Tom was good at that. Pedro's good at that. I mean, just go right down the list of instructors. They could do that. And we were lucky. We were blessed to be able to have such good instructors show up. Like Harley Refsall. I mean, holy buckets. I mean, talk about a giant. He was just amazing. And I might say that Harley is in the throes of dementia now with Alzheimer's. And the last time I talked to him, he says, "I've been blessed with Alzheimer's," he said. And I just thought, wow, way to go, Harley. He's still carving down in the basement. But, it's that attitude. It's that spirit that people brought to the school. It was just, well, I can't explain it. I mean, it's just, this thing just popped.
Okay, and we're getting on time-wise, but before people might want to come up and ask or tell a story or two, any last stories or things you want to share before people come up here and tell some things they remember that you may not?
Well, I did have a class of youngsters from, I think it was down in the cities. I don't remember where, but this class was going to make canoe paddles, and one kid in the class says, "Well, I'm not making a canoe paddle. Forget it." He says, "I'm going to run off that dock and go swimming." It was like, really? Huh. So it's like, okay, all right. Now, it's pretty deep off the end of the dock. You have to go through the whole process of explaining how deep it is, and not too many people can stay in there longer than a minute. So, how is this going to work? I was trying to work this out with them, and the rest of the class is going, can we start making canoe paddles? And so they headed to the other building, so I'm talking to this guy about jumping into the water, and finally I talked him into just, going over here in the corner, and you might want to leave your underwear on, and maybe just wade in and dip down. And so I finally talked him down to that, and it was like, he did that, and he got those needs met, and and then we went over and he worked on his canoe paddle. That's,
Well, I mean, the one that came to mind when you mentioned the ski making was Peter and I were at the Energy Fair outside of Stevens Point, Wisconsin, with a booth for North House very early, like in 2000. And we had all these, crafts and so forth that were made at North House. And I don't know how many people would grab onto the skis and look at one of us and say, they just don't make them like they used to. And then carved right in the ski was like, you might want to look on the date, because it was carved 2000 or 2001 right into the skis. So, yeah, we do.
Sweet, very sweet. Well, anything else you want to add before? Surely someone's going to come up here and ask you a question or tell a story. Anything else?
No, I'm anxious to hear what they have to say.
Yeah.
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 Get it down to kid size. Thank you. I heard the word community over and over again from you folks. I am not from Grand Marais, but I have taken dozens of classes here, and I feel a sense of community from the people who work here and the fellow students. I'd like to speak a little bit about the instruction. I've never had a bad instructor or even a mediocre one. I have been a mediocre student many times, but I've taken dozens of classes at North House. I wanted to speak about two of my favorite people who unfortunately are no longer teaching here. One is Karen Smaby. At the very first Fiber Arts Week, she taught a class on how to make a fiber art journal. I had never made a book. I had no clue at the time that the journal she taught me to make is one of the most complex types of journals. But she got me interested in bookmaking, and so now I'm working on a certificate at the Minnesota Center for Book Arts in bookmaking. I took several other classes from Karen. Unfortunately, she passed away several years ago. And I have a penny rug that I started in one of her classes that each time I pick it up to try to finish it, I'm just not ready to. One of these days, I'll stitch the last squares in her memory. The other person is Harley Refsel. I had done some woodblock carving, but nothing three-dimensional. And Harley had a way of teaching. I think I took 2 classes from him on figure carving. He never once said to me, "Let me show you how to do it," or even, he never said, "That's not the right way." He would pull up a chair, and if you've had a class from Harley, you know what this is like. He'd pull up a chair beside you, and he'd say, "Do you mind if I carve on that for a while?" And he could tell by looking which parts needed help. And he could tell, for example, on a figure that I might have worked on everything except the facial features, which were the harder, more delicate things. Sometimes he would even finish that part for me, but he never once said, even, let me show you how to do it. He did it intuitively, I guess, but the whole time he would be telling stories. And they weren't stories about wood carving. They're about his childhood, about places he and his wife had visited, and all kinds of things like that. And I loved his teaching style. Just briefly, too, I need to say, give a good shout out to the interns. I have said to Greg many times, I don't know how you choose the interns, but they're all excellent. When I ask one of them, what is your craft? They don't tell me one. They'll start with one and they'll say, but I also do this and this and this. And that's true of most of the people I've met here. They're lifelong learners. Many of the interns come back. Some of them are working here. Some of them are teaching here. Or they just show up at special events. And anyway, wherever Greg is, keep on choosing the quality instructors and interns that you've found here.
Not very often that we have to pull the mic up for me. Usually Matt is here and we've got to take it down a ways. I will attest to the stories about Harley. I've taken many classes from Harley, and he would absolutely just come over and say, here, let me help you with that, or let me carve it for a little bit. And he turned many of my ashtrays into beautiful figurines that are just really, really nice. Our daughter, I'll also attest to Tom's story about the youth camp in Longville. Our daughter got involved with that very early on. She was like 8 years old and eventually became writing director there. But she got to know the Healy family. And we bought a cabin up on Devil Track on 95. And she said, Dad, Mom, you got to come down and meet these two guys that I know, Peter Hendrickson and Tom Healy. So we came down, trudged down, and met them right out here in front of the red building. And we said, wow, this is really a great idea, because we interpret, at an agricultural interpretive center down in southern Minnesota, and we would demonstrate making Swedish potato sausage. That's all we ever did. I mean, I made it since I was a kid, but we demoed it there. Didn't teach anybody anything, just demoed it there. And we got to talking to Tom and Peter over here, and they said, well, we kind of thought that this is going to be a great idea, because we love the idea of teaching old world skills and keeping these roots for our people. And this Farm America Agricultural Interpretive Center just never quite got off the ground. It just kind of hummed along in neutral for many, many, many years. And it's in a populated area, rich area, people all over the place interested in agriculture, and it just never took off. So Diane and I said, wow, this is really a great idea, Peter and Tom. This is wonderful. We kind of turned to each other and said, this will never work. Not up here on the North Shore. There's nobody here. These guys don't know what they're doing. So we said, this is a wonderful idea, you guys. Way to go. And we kind of walked away. But they said, well, what do you do? And we said, well, we don't have any talents. All we do is, demonstrate potato sausage. You do? You could teach that. Well, of course, the only place to teach it was in our cabin, which had about a 3/4 butt kitchen in it. We had 8 students in there. I made up a sign that said North House Sausage Company and put it on South Shore Drive, and so people would be able to recognize it. And that's, so we started that, had several classes in there. Our dog would be in there licking up everything we spilled. And it worked. It worked. And then we moved into what one of our students called the garage, making sausage in a garage in the Blue Building now. And we made it there for many years. And then we've been bouncing all over the campus until we ended up with our own kitchen there, which was just a wonderful thing. But Mark said today that this place just popped. It just popped. You said that a few minutes ago. And the thing is that this place popped from the top down. Thanks to these guys, and Peter right over there too. My hat's off to you guys and the leadership that you've acquired here over the years. This is a great, great place. Thanks so much.
And thank you. And that's a perfect segue. I think Greg is going to come back on and has something in his hands.
So the rumor is rain is coming in. So we're taking the microphone and we're taking all of you indoors where there's birthday cake.